Today I'm going to talk and going to be a bit blasphemous about safety. We've already talked about safety quite a bit over the last couple of days. I'm going to talk about zero harm and probably not going to say some things that safety professionals would like, and that's because my background isn't in safety, it's in operations and production. And now what I do with most of my time is help mining companies with risk, which is a little bit different to safety, and mainly help them out with risk at their high end of the spectrum. So fatalities, multiple fatalities, business interruption risk, major environmental hazards, things like that. And what I've seen as I go around and help different companies is that we've had this zero harm thing for a while, and what worries me is that we're starting to, maybe it's run its use by date. So maybe it's been good for us and it's helped us out over the last 10 to 15 years, but maybe it's time that we worry that we're putting too much emphasis now on the zero part of it. And what is that taking our eye off the ball? What is that distracting us away from in other circles? So I'm going to talk about three things today. First is about zero harm, my thoughts on zero harm. Secondly, I'm going to talk about, well, if zero harm is drawing us to manage what matters least, well, what is it that matters most? What is it that we need to be thinking and focusing about? And how do we do that? So what are the things we should be doing to manage those things that matter most? We've talked a lot in the last couple of days about things we can do to manage injuries, but is there something we need to do differently to manage those most important things? And there'll be some triangles in my presentation. I noticed Peter didn't have any models in the shape of triangles. We had plenty yesterday, but rest assured I've got plenty to come later on in my presentation. So zero harm, where did it come from? Well, I would have loved to have been in the room when zero harm was first mentioned as a concept, and I guess it started probably at BHP or somewhere like that, and in some sort of strategy workshop. I think when it was first mentioned I probably would have laughed, and then I would have realised that it's not a bad long-term goal, a vision of zero harm to the environment, to the community, to our people. It's the zero part though that I think after a while I have the problem with, the suggestion that we can get it to zero harm. And I suppose it grew up out of the iceberg model, the theory being that we had the iceberg model and we talked about near misses becoming incidents, becoming major injuries, becoming fatalities. And zero harm suggests that we can melt the whole iceberg, that we can get rid of everything, and that we can take it away altogether. And it's been good, it's worked well for us. Our fatalities, and we've seen plenty of these graphs, fatalities are going down, injuries are going down and starting to bottom out in the States, and we're hoping that it's forming a chart or a graph that looks a little bit like this. It's getting slowly closer and closer to that zero. This bottom line here is our zero line, that's our zero harm, that's where we want to get to. And we're getting there, but I guess mathematically, if we have a graph like this, we call it an asymptotic graph, and it never ever quite gets to zero. It gets closer and closer and closer and closer, but never quite gets there. It gets there. And when it's a measure, when it's an outcome measure like it is for us with injuries or fatalities, every little increment that you make to get it further and further and further takes more and more effort and more time and resources to get it from one stage to the next. And I guess over the last 10 years, on aggregate, we've sort of reduced our LTI rate in the industry to about a third of what it was 10 years ago, taken 70% of the injuries out. We've reduced the fatality rate by half. But to do that again over the next 10 years, to reduce it to a third of its current level again, and to reduce fatalities by another half, isn't going to take the same amount of effort, time, resources and money that it's taken over the last 10 years. It's going to take more. And in fact, if we look at the statistics, if we could do that, if over the next 10 years we could reduce our injury rate again to a third of what it is today, we would in fact have made our mines as equally safe places what our schools are for teachers today. So we would have made a mine equally as safe injury-wise as a school. And I think that's certainly a lofty goal, and perhaps getting towards the point where we're putting in a little bit too much effort. What else about zero harm? Well, it's based on the principle that all accidents are preventable. True. We do our incident investigations, we figure out what went wrong, and we work out that it could have been prevented. Maybe we put in some new controls. If we do an incident investigation and find out that it was just pure chance, there was nothing we could have done to prevent the injury, we'll normally go back and start the investigation again. And I guess all accidents are preventable, but that doesn't mean that you can prevent all accidents. And it also doesn't mean that you can predict all accidents. And just because all accidents are preventable by controls doesn't mean that when we add a control in place that would have prevented something that's happened, that it's going to prevent it from happening again necessarily. The other thing zero harm says to me, and I suppose there's, I take the definition of the zero harm goal being literally that, zero. And if we can get to zero harm, well, what does that mean to us? Well, it means that we must have zero incidents. Surely, if we don't harm anyone, we must have zero incidents. And likewise, zero accidents. But if we have zero accidents and zero incidents, that means we need to have zero near misses. Because really the only difference between a near miss and an accident is normally a little bit of luck. A metre here and there, a minute here or there. So we'd have zero near misses. And if we're going to have zero near misses, that means zero mistakes. That means we expect our people at our mines day in, day out to do their jobs in the uncertain geological environment that we work, that mining is naturally in, without mistake. And we become close to what Toyota wants to do with their production. And we have the other great classic resource sapping process called Six Sigma that can tend to get skewed and drive towards process and not worry about value. But even Six Sigma, even in an automated plant that makes cars, doesn't target zero. It targets one error in 1 million, or whatever it is. It's to the 6th degree. Even they don't try and do everything and get everything down to zero. They realise that it can't be done. So let me ask, I guess, people in this room a couple of questions. Who here, whose mine or whose company has zero harm as a stated goal? Hands up, there must be a few. Yeah, there's a few around the place. And who here thinks that zero harm is achievable? And you've probably got different definitions to what I've got, different ways of thinking about it. Who here thinks zero harm is achievable? Yeah, not many? Okay. But if it is, well, who would then mind if we think about some of our other processes, our risk processes? Who, if we look at your risk management way of working, has anything defined in there called an acceptable level of risk? So we draw a bit of a line on our matrix, or we have a little chart that says if a risk is over 25, it has to go to a manager for approval. If it's over 50, it has to go to the GM. And if it's below that, that's acceptable. Yeah, we have an acceptable level of risk in our procedures. But acceptable risk and zero harm don't work together. Zero harm is acceptable risk of zero. Likewise, you might have in your risk assessment tables a column called residual risk. Same thing. If we're going to accept that there's a residual risk in our operations, well, we're not really at zero harm. We might be working towards it, but we're not there. And what worries me is not that zero harm's a bad, long-term, lofty, aspirational goal, but that as we get closer to it, it starts to take our eye off the ball, and we start to think about managing to zero rather than managing what matters most. We might be worrying about what matters least. And I guess we talked a little bit about leadership yesterday, and obviously we think a fair bit about goals, and we think about even goals in our life, and they should be big and lofty and the BHAG, and they should be things we're looking and maybe aren't achievable. Our SMART model of goals tells us that it should be achievable. So if we don't think zero harm's achievable, then it doesn't match our SMART model. And we also, even in our own lives, we have goals for ourselves, and we know that we're going to have to make, if we want to achieve some of those goals, sacrifices in other areas. But if we focus too much on one of those goals and make those sacrifices, what we don't want to do is make the sacrifices in an area that can permanently affect people's lives and can result in fatalities. And I guess there's a bit of sort of talk in this area in the safety world, and our current poster child for this theory about managing fatalities differently from managing injuries is our Deepwater Horizon off the coast of the US there. And for those that don't know this kind of story, the day that the rig exploded, some VIPs from the States had flown out to the rig to give them an award and a big pat on the back for 7 years LTI free. They're seen as being one of the safest rigs in the organisation. That organisation obviously being BP. The VIPs flew out there, gave them the award, gave them a pat on the back, did some safety observations, did some management walk around, which I'll talk about a bit later. Flew off the oil rig. Later that afternoon, 11 guys lost their lives, and of course all the other things that happened. That's only the most recent incident. There's been sort of similar trends in the mining industry, really bad run in the Pilbara area across both the BHP and Rio mines of great safety performance suddenly being shattered by multiple fatalities over the course of 12 months. Likewise, Xstrata as a global business went through a bit of a phase, a bit of a 12-month period there where their safety seemed to be all going the right way, and then they had a series of fatalities. And all these sort of things are suggesting, well, do we need to take a bit of a different approach to how we manage injuries, to how we manage catastrophes? I read an interesting paper just recently, which I can share with those that like it, and Deloitte were talking about measures and targets, and one of the things they talked about as a key way to manage safety was just to think about doing quality mining. Don't worry too much about safety itself and measuring it and trying to manage it. Just worry about doing your mining really, really well, and the safety will fall